Good morning. I'm Jim Lindsay, Director of the Robert S. Strauss Center. I want to welcome you to day 2 of our conference, Bridging the Gap, Universities Meeting Global Challenges. This conference is supported by a very generous grant from the Ford Foundation in New York. The purpose of what we're trying to do over these 2 days is to examine key trends on the global scene, to understand the challenges and opportunities facing policymakers and the public alike. Our hope is that coming out of yesterday's discussions and today's discussions, that we'll have a better understanding of sort of the issues that universities should be trying to tackle so they can better contribute to the national debate about how to react to our increasingly globalized world. In a moment, I'm going to introduce this morning's panel, but first I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, which is first and foremost, if you have one of these very lovely devices, a BlackBerry or cell phone, I would ask you to turn it off. The reason I ask is because the signal tends to interfere with the amplification system in the room, and when they're on, every 10 seconds you get a little pulse from your cell phone, we'll start getting static on our system here, and it gets, after about 10 or 15 minutes, really annoying. So if you could just turn it off, I'd greatly appreciate it. Having said that, it's my great pleasure to introduce this morning's panel on energy, the future of energy in a globalizing world. And to introduce our panelists, we're very fortunate to have with us today David Spence, who's a professor of law, business, and regulation at the McCombs School of Business here at the University of Texas at Austin. He's a lawyer, accomplished professor, has written widely on these issues. In keeping with the theme of our conference, he has not only worked in the academic world, but has been a lawyer practicing out, I guess we on campus called the real world. And so with further ado, David, it's yours.
Thanks very much, Jim. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to do it slowly because Greg, podium here on my right, your left, has yet to get his microphone on. So I'll introduce him fully, and everyone fully, as he does that. Our format today, before I introduce the panelists, our format today is, as it was described to me, a Charlie Rose-style interview, which is fine for me because I'm the spitting image of Charlie Rose. So we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to leave 15 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. So as questions arise as we're speaking in your mind, write them down, and we'll make time at the end for you to ask them. Okay, our two panelists. On my left, your right, we have Jason Hayes from the American Coal Council. He's the communications director of the American Coal Council. He's has had his own consulting company dealing with many of the strategic communication issues that affect the energy industry, particularly environmental and public policy issues. He did that before he came to the Coal Council. He's got a Master's of Environmental Design from the University of Calgary and a BSc from the Natural Resource Conservation from the University of British Columbia. And now operates out of Phoenix, presumably fled Canada's cold weather for the warm weather of Phoenix. On my right and your left, we have Greg Poland from ExxonMobil Corporation. Greg is Corporate Issue Manager for Climate Change for ExxonMobil. He's come down here from Irving to be with us today. He's got a bachelor's degree from the University of Oregon in Public Policy Planning and Management. And most relevant to the people here, he's also got a master's degree from our very own LBJ School of Public Affairs, which he got back in 2000, so he's back in his old stomping grounds here today. Okay, so what I'd like to do, gentlemen, is start by focusing on the change in policy priorities that has come with the change in administration. And so I'd like to start with you, Greg. I hope your mic's working here.
No, it's not.
It's not?
Okay.
So the Obama administration signaled before they came to office, and we're already actually seeing some of this being put into practice, that they were going to... We've got it.
I was joking.
They've already started to... Oh, no, mine's gone. Can you hear me? Mine's on?
Mine's out there now. Okay, that's it, Dave.
Do we need to pause? Sorry, this is going to be podcast, and so we want to make sure we get this. Okay. Greg, I'm going to start with you. The Obama administration signaled even before they came into office that they wanted to change our energy policy priorities and try and encourage people to shift away from fossil fuels and rely more on renewables and other kinds of sources. What sorts of changes does ExxonMobil see coming down the pike in terms of our policy future, and how is ExxonMobil preparing to deal with those changes?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting us, specifically for me to be back here. I haven't been back here since I graduated. This place wasn't even here. It's beautiful. You all should be complimented on this place. It's beautiful. In terms of what the administration is going to do or future energy policy, I certainly am not. I think you'll understand I'm certainly not going to make any predictions, and I have no idea. And if I did, I probably would not be sitting on this panel. I'd probably be doing something else. But that said, the administration clearly has enormous challenges ahead of them, primarily within the economy and focusing on energy. We proceed with our climate change issue team. We've established some principles, and we have actually reached out, and we intend to, and we hope to work constructively with the administration. There's just a few basic principles we hope that the administration and Congress would take into consideration when forming their energy policy. First of all, a tax policy that ensures U.S. competitiveness, policies that provide access to energy. We agree with the administration in that to address the energy challenges ahead, we're going to need to increase the production of all energy sources, and that definitely includes fossil fuels. Also, to have policymakers realize the long lead times that are involved in energy production, again, in all forms of energy production. In our industry, I'll just speak to ours, often projects, from start to finish, from planning to production, you can have anywhere from a 5 to 7 to 10 to 12-year window. It takes incredible amount of investment to pull these projects off. They're technologically risky, they're financially risky. And in order to stay with those, in order to initiate them and stay with them, and this is in all energy sectors, I think the producers, the developers of those sources are going to need predictable and stable fiscal policies.
Okay. We mentioned that you focus on climate change issues within ExxonMobil. Can you tell us a little bit about what ExxonMobil's position on climate change and global warming is, and how you foresee dealing in an environment in which greenhouse gases may be regulated in the future?
Well, we have said many times publicly, I should say I rolled into this position in October of this year. I was formerly in Alaska. Great stories about that. But so if I say I don't know to a certain question, which I'm not going to say to this one, but I hope you'll afford me the opportunity to do that, and I could clearly get an answer for you if you'd like. We've said publicly many times the risks associated with the increased greenhouse gas emissions no doubt warrant action. The increase in those emissions are clearly tied to energy use. I think some people are surprised to hear us say this. Often I find when I go to settings such as this, our position is mischaracterized. We have an obligation in that that a majority of the increases are a result of energy use. We're involved in all sorts of research and development. We fund universities around the world. In the U.S., MIT, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, University of Texas, Georgia Tech. I was at MIT last week. Our initiative set up the Global Climate Change Environmental Project, GCEP at Stanford University. We started that with a $100 million contribution. It is, I think, with other businesses, it got to about $225 million. That organization is involved with other universities. I think they have worked with about 40 other universities worldwide, so that one project is now having a rippling effect around the world. It has, I think, about 300 grad students, postdoc students have worked on this project. We look at this in both the short term and long term. Some of the projects we have invested research in the past, and we have been focused on this for years. I think some people will think it obviously is, and I don't mean this derogatorily, it is obviously the flavor of the day, climate change. It has not been the flavor of the day for us. We've been involved for years in this, and some of the research is already panning out. For instance, we've invented tire liners that keep tires inflated longer. Advanced fuel economy engine oil. lightweight automobile plastics. If you take those three, just those three technologies, and those are in the short term, mind you, if you take those three technologies and apply them to just, say, approximately 1/3 of the vehicles on the road today, that correlates to a savings of about 5 billion gallons of gasoline and a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I got to look at my notes on this one. The reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is approximate to removing about 8 million cars from the road. And that's real, tangible progress. It may not sound sexy, tire liners, to people, and you're not going to have any forums or panels on tire liners, or maybe even light automobile plastics, but it's making a difference. And I can get into some of the much longer-term research later on in our discussion.
Okay, thanks. I want to come back to some of what you said, but I also want to give Jason a chance to chip in here. The coal industry is facing these same sorts of changes in policy priorities that are coming out of the Obama administration. In fact, you're already seeing some changes in policies that are affecting coal-fired power plants. Mm-hmm. How are you preparing for this changed environment, and what do you foresee happening to coal-fired power and the coal industry generally under the Obama administration?
I think the one thing that we're focusing on or concentrating on is the fact that in the United States, on average, half of your electricity comes from coal. So every time you turn on a light bulb, half the light that's hitting you is coming from coal. So it's something that not a lot of people realize. Working from something that Greg said, he was talking about the investments and the timelines that are required, pardon me, to have the energy sources put in line. It's a broader step for the coal industry, because you're not only investing in mines, like the complete setup to get the mine going, the trucks and the shovels and all that sort of thing. You're also dealing with rail investment. You're dealing with ports and terminals. You're dealing with utilities, and each one of those investments has its own timeline. So you're looking at 3 to 4 years to put a coal-fired power plant in place. You're looking at 3 to 4 years for a mine. So when you're going through these processes, it could be as long as a decade before things change. And we recognize that the Obama administration has said that they want cap and trade for carbon, that type of thing. But recognizing the investments, recognizing the timelines that are involved, we also need to, I guess, educate people on what's involved in getting all this going. So it's difficult to stop or change things quickly in that big of a system. So we're looking in the future toward them being able to put in interim measures. They're not going to be able to, or any, not just the Obama administration. We're going to have another election in 2 years. Things may change. I don't know. But both parties actually in the last election were talking about cap and trade. So it's not just, it's not a partisan issue, really. It's something that everybody's dealing with. But because of the timelines involved, interim measures are what's likely. We're going to do things slowly. And looking toward the future, the Energy Information Administration, part of the Department of Energy, is looking out to 2030 as actually having coal-fueled energy increase. There'll be an initial downtrend. We're right now at, I think it's 49.7% of the energy comes from coal, going down to as low as 47.5%, but by 2030, it could be up to 54%.
So what do you mean by interim measures? And secondly, so if there is a gradual phase-in of some sort of greenhouse gas emissions regulation, how do you see coal's role in that ultimate new future? What will that do to the coal-fired power plants?
Coal is going to be doing the same thing as pretty much every other energy source, relying on technology to improve environmental performance, to improve overall efficiencies, that sort of thing. And if you look around the world, what's happening is throughout Europe, Japan, they're investing in coal. They're building new coal-fueled power plants. China is the next obvious one. India, they're all building coal-fueled power plants. And it was Secretary Chu Energy Secretary Chu said that essentially the U.S., what we need to do is rely on our technologies to improve what's going on in the rest of the world. We can sell or trade our technologies and that sort of thing. So looking forward, as I said, more than half of our electricity is going to come from coal well into the future. So that's not going to change. So what will change, the interim measures that will be brought in, is better ways to use the energy more efficiently, more cleanly, those sorts of things. So there will be, it's likely that there will be cap and trade put in place. So that would be one interim measure. Then it'll be, you know, what level are they setting the cap at, that type of thing. But some folks have called for a complete ban on coal. That's not likely to happen. So when we say interim measures, that's what we mean.
So just to finish up this point, so if we have a cap and trade, meaning a tradable permit system whereby all of the total amount of emissions of greenhouse gases goes down over time, but the emitters each are given or buy permits that they can then buy and sell amongst themselves, we'll still see emissions from coal-fired power plants have to go down under a system like that, right?
Yes.
So what sorts of, and you said technology might be part of the solution or might be part of how coal continues to thrive in that new environment. Can you say a little bit about what sort of technologies might help deal with those issues?
There's a good example being built right now in Edwardsport, Indiana. Duke Energy is building, it's called IGCC, Integrated Gasification Combined Cycle plant, where basically what they do is they gasify the coal before they combust it, and then combust it in a situation that's very similar to natural gas. When you gasify like that, you can remove many of the impurities. You can deal with greenhouse gas emissions more simply. I'm not an engineer, so I won't go heavily into the technology, but essentially it's a cleaner burning, more efficient method. The more efficient you become, like EPRI and
Electric Power Research Institute.
Right, and the Coal Utilization Research Council, KERC, just recently released a report that showed that for every 1% decrease, or sorry, 1% increase in efficiency, you get a 2.5% decrease in CO2 emissions. So when we're talking about like a 1940s or 1950s era pulverized coal plant, they were running at basically a 33% thermal efficiency. The newer plants, like an IGCC and the better, more efficient plants, they run at 40, 45%, and then depending on what technologies you're pushing, they're trying to go even higher. So if you're getting those kind of increases in efficiency, you're going to see corresponding decreases in emissions.
And IGCC plants presumably more expensive to produce power from them.
Yes, they're more expensive. There is a premium, but what happens is with all technology, I mean, it was real expensive in the 60s to go to the moon, but now we have private individuals going to the moon. So the more you develop the technology, the more you use it, the cheaper it becomes because we can become more efficient at building it. There's other styles, the supercritical and ultra supercritical plants, which is basically they use better quality steels or alloys, and what it allows them to do is increase the steam pressures that they're working with, and again, that makes it more efficient. You become better at using the fuel, so you use less fuel to create the same amount of energy.
And as I also, I'm not an engineer either, but as I understand the IGCC concept, you're basically destroying almost all of the air pollutants except carbon dioxide. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially
so
what you're
bringing capture the carbon dioxide and
right.
do something with it, right?
Yes.
So that needs to be put under the ground or sequestered or used in some way, sent to a greenhouse or whatever.
Right.
And so the other part of the problem will be finding places to put that.
Right, and one thing that, going back to your earlier question, what do we expect to see coming from the Obama administration? The just signed stimulus bill has $3.2 billion in funding for clean coal technologies, carbon sequestration. There's another report that was just released in concert with the National Mining Association that said essentially they're looking at clean coal technologies, bringing something like 7 million man hours worth of work or human hours worth of work over the next short period of time. So these are the things that we're expecting to see. This is how it's going to work. Investment in research, investment in development of these new technologies, and as they're built, they'll become more affordable.
Okay. Greg, sticking with air pollution, and perhaps not just global warming, but any of the sort of air pollution issues we've been talking about, are there similar, you mentioned a few technologies already, are there similar sort of technological changes that you see in the pipeline that will help, say, oil refineries deal with a cap-and-trade world, or cars fueled by gasoline, continue to be fueled by gasoline, and yet contribute fewer pollutants and fewer greenhouse gases into the environment?
Sure. We can get I could talk about technology. One thing I want to talk about, I was recently at a conference, and Daniel Yergin, who some of you may know, wrote the prize and is head of Cambridge Energy Research Associates, said something, our greatest source of energy in the future is efficiency today. That will be our greatest source of energy. So the focus on efficiency can't be ignored. I mean, we are constantly doing that. We've been doing it for years and years. Our Baton Rouge refinery, for instance, just by simply retooling our operation and maintenance, we've reduced emissions at that plant about 63%. Did you ask about what, did you want to know some technologies?
Yeah, sort of how do you see, if there is a world, if we do face a new regulatory regime in which carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions are constrained, how does ExxonMobil see itself, what does it see as its role in that different regulatory system?
Sure. First of all, we think the debate perhaps has been, not perhaps, the debate's been too narrow. Of course, the policy that's being debated most heavily or talked about most heavily is cap and trade. And it's being incorporated in Europe, and we have business in Europe, and we're functioning within a cap and trade. We think there's another mechanism that should be discussed, and most economists, leading economists, would agree with this. In fact, and it's a carbon tax. The importance of the carbon tax, the important point would be a revenue-neutral carbon tax. You apply a very transparent price signal, very transparent price on carbon, but the revenue that's generated from that tax is then rebated to consumers. You can offset payroll taxes, you can play with that and decide how to do it, but fundamentally, now politically, folks argue that's not viable. We're not willing to concede that. There's a lot of folks in industry, there's a lot of folks in NGOs, and there's a lot of folks in government that do support it. Of course, for a politician to support a tax is difficult, but with the revenue neutral piece, it does make it a bit different. Inherently, whatever policies pass, it needs to be transparent. So people, not only does industry, but consumers need a price signal. I mean, we make decisions based on what we think is going to happen in the future. We think it's inordinately more complex, a cap and trade, to administer than a carbon tax. Fundamentally, there needs to be a uniform price of carbon that everyone understands, that everyone sees. There's recently an electricity company CEO, and I can't recall who it was, had a comment. I'm not sure I feel comfortable allowing Wall Street to set the price of electricity for my consumers. That's awfully simplistic. I'll give that to you, but it's sound. And we just think the debate needs to happen, needs to open up. And we will not concede that it's going to be cap and trade. That said, we function with a cap and trade in Europe right now. They have their own issues, but to their credit, they're notionally they're just getting started. No, I don't think we're even willing to say it doesn't work, but we think there's a better option.
So I agree with you. So most economists would favor a tax. I think that's a cleaner solution. That from the point of view of environmental groups and others, the advantage of a cap and trade system is that you know how much pollution is going to happen. It's the total number of permits given out. That's the maximum amount of pollution you're going to get. It does create uncertainty for the firms because the price of the permits varies, as you've seen in Europe, all over the place.
Sure.
Do you have an answer for that concern?
Well, I don't know. We have an answer. We have an idea. And I don't think this is our idea. I think this comes from economists. But it is true. That's probably the loudest criticism of carbon tax, that you like carbon tax because it ensures fiscal certainty but not environmental certainty. The carbon tax, one of the principles of the carbon tax that we would advocate for would be a tax that you would evaluate in certain intervals, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, come back and adjust it. You set a trajectory of emissions targets. You set what the tax you think, what you think the tax needs to be at the beginning, and obviously you're going to need to readjust that. Probably the people in this room are familiar with Europe. They're having to look at their cap and trade again. When they establish cap and trade, it's not locked in stone. It's going to have to be, and we would hope even in this country, if cap and trade is the vehicle, is the mechanism, whatever it is, that we at least open ourselves up to developments in science, economic theory, the economy, and relook at whatever mechanism we pass. But there is a way with a carbon tax, and most economists agree with this, is to try to match up the trajectory of both the tax and your emissions target. So you can set
by adjusting the tax rate.
By adjusting the tax rate.
Periodically, yeah.
Now, to say there's certainty in either one of those, I don't know that you can say there is certainty. You will absolutely reach that number. We just don't know yet. And this is a decadal problem. We're not talking about, for instance, my company might not want me to say this, but in Europe, they're in the infant stages. Climate change is a decadal problem. It's not, you're not going to pass a mechanism, check it in 2 years, what's going to happen. This is going to be generationally, and we're not going to know for years and years whether what we're doing is right. So, and because of that, we think there needs to be a more open debate, an intellectually honest debate about what needs to be done, and not necessarily an ideological debate about what needs to be done.
And for those that aren't familiar with the Europeans, what's happening in Europe, they've had for several years now, 4 or 5 years, a cap and trade system, a tradable permit system for greenhouse gases. And they've had some difficulty sort of getting the numbers right. They've had tremendous volatility in the prices, and they're now in their second phase of that system. It's something they instituted because of their ratification of the Kyoto Agreement. But it's providing sort of a school for others who might want to design a cap and trade system.
Oh, it certainly is, but I don't think that's too fine of a point. They are having to go back and relook at it. Sorry, the debate is often the cap and trade is going to set certain what our emissions will be. It just has not panned out. But again, it's going to take many years to know whether we're right or wrong. But as long as we have an open mind going in, that we're willing to make adjustments to whatever we thought was right at the time of implementation.
Jason, does the Coal Council have a position on cap and trade versus environmental taxes?
Generally, no, we don't. We're careful in how we approach these things because we have member companies on both sides of the issue, so we don't say hard and fast, you know, it's got to be this way.
Other, yeah.
We don't lobby in that sense. So,
does the Coal Council? The Coal Council represents both mining and coal-fired combustion, owners of coal-fired combustion plants?
Yeah, we like to say we have members that span the entire process from getting the coal out of the ground to shipping it to utilities to actually to the place where the person plugs something into the wall. So
the process of designing policies, not always, but sometimes the interests of upstream versus downstream is not exactly aligned in some of these cases. Yeah, it puts you in a tough spot. So I will leave that subject. The coal industry is seeing the owners of coal-fired combustion are seeing more and more resistance from states. There are some states who have taken stands against new coal-fired power plants within their borders, or at least some of the leading politicians in those states have. Mm-hmm. What's been the Coal Council's reaction or response to that?
We think where somebody advocates against coal, we're obviously going to do the opposite. We support coal. We believe coal is our most abundant, secure, affordable, and increasingly clean fuel resource, fossil fuel resource for sure. But yeah, definitely we support the use of coal broadly.
And the arguments that you would raise in response to I think Kansas was the most recent example of Governor Sebelius stopping or prohibiting further development of coal-fired power. Mm-hmm. The arguments that you raise in response to efforts like that are the ones that you gave us earlier about clean coal, and because they're mostly motivated by environmental concerns, are they not?
Yeah, the Kansas plant specifically, Rod Brumby, who's the Secretary of Kansas Department of Environment and Health. His ruling on the permit for the Holcomb plant expansion was based completely on the idea that he believed carbon dioxide was going to be a damaging influence on the environment. As far as I understand, all the other permits had been met. Permit requirements, legal requirements, regulatory requirements had been met. And the permit was denied solely because he believed carbon dioxide was going to be an issue later. So we would argue that that's an inappropriate means of dealing with the situation. I've already gone over the other technologies that are available. There's more technologies, the pre-combustion technologies where you remove impurities from the coal before you combust, or you upgrade coal. Essentially, it's called dewatering. You dry the coal out before you use it. It makes it more efficient because it essentially brings up the BTUs per pound. Again, making it more efficient. I already said IGCC, ultra and supercritical plants. All of these are ways, they're kind of similar to what Greg was saying. You know, if you improve one piece of the puzzle, like the plastics for the cars or tire liners, that type of thing, then you decrease overall emissions. And what you end up with is a balancing act, I guess, because you have a public that's demanding and more and more and more affordable and accessible electricity. They want it now, and they don't want rolling blackouts. They want to be able to afford it. When they get their bills, they don't want to be paying a bunch of extra charges for something, but at the same time, they're also demanding clean energy. Mm-hmm. So you got to start balancing the social, economic, and environmental aspects of sustainability.
And these technologies collectively are what people are referring to when they use the phrase clean coal?
Clean coal technologies, yeah.
And we've heard not just the Bush administration, we've also heard Obama make reference to wanting to pursue clean coal options. And also in the news lately has been the Future Gen facility, which had been stopped by the prior administration, and the congressman from Illinois are trying to get it started again. Which technology does that represent? The Future
They
Gen?
were going to use a gasification process.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, the funding for that one was essentially put on hold. It was, depending on who you asked, some people said it was essentially just mothballed for a little bit, and because of the Senate voted to approve their funding last year, that carried them through until after the election. So now, like I said, in the new stimulus bill, $3.2 billion of stimulus funds that are related to clean coal technologies, carbon sequestration, those sorts of things. So Future Gen may very well be back on the table. Even when the Department of Energy had kind of said they were going to hold off on the project, they still agreed that they were going to fund other projects, other carbon sequestration projects. By stopping the funding on Future Gen, they were not necessarily saying that that's it, we're throwing carbon sequestration away. They said we're going to take that funding and put it into other projects.
One of the, we hear a lot about renewables and possibly doing a lot more to encourage or perhaps require the use of renewables to generate electricity. Mm-hmm. One way we could do that would be to have a national renewable portfolio standard under which electric utilities would be required to purchase a certain percentage of their power from renewable sources or perhaps tradable credits that represent generation of renewable sources. Mm-hmm. Has the American Coal Council been involved in debates about that sort of issue, and if so, what has been their position?
Again, we don't get involved in specific debates on certain legislation, but overall, we believe that we need electricity. So, like I said, everyone probably in the room has a cell phone or a BlackBerry. I see several laptops and people typing furiously away. Those all take electricity. So more people in the last year and a half, there's been 6 million people added to the population of the country. So we've gone from 300 to 306 million people. They're looking out to, I believe it's 2030, or 2050, there's supposed to be 420 million. Every one of those people is going to take electricity. So we say we need it. If it's wind, nuclear, coal, renewables, large hydro, we need electricity. So we're not going to stand in the way and shake our fists at one version or one type of generation. We're going to say, yeah, build it, definitely. And as an example, wind energy, we say definitely build it, because for every windmill that they build, they use something like 170 tons of met coal to produce the steel that goes into that wind turbine. So yeah, go ahead, build wind, because you're using met coal when you do it. They also are going to use other products for the cement, recycling coal ash, that type of thing for the cement, that they build the foundations of these wind turbines for. So additionally, wind only blows part of the time. So when it's not blowing, you need something to generate the electricity that wind turbine is not generating. So coal plant, there you go. Set it up right beside it. So.
Thank you. And the analogous question for you, Greg, I suppose, would have to do with alternate transportation fuels. At least that would be one of the questions that ExxonMobil would be concerned about. And there's a lot of new incentives for biofuels and hybrids and electric vehicles. Has Exxon, first of all, is Exxon involved in any of those biofuels efforts? And second, what has been their position on the new policies that
Sure.
are designed to encourage these alternate
Sure.
fuels?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it needs to be said there's not one source of energy out there. Talk about a renewable, talk about fossil fuels, talk about coal, that could both meet the demands in the future as well as reduce the emissions. It's going to take as I said earlier, it's going to take increased production in all these. Prior to any standard or controls being passed by any legislative body, we've been invested heavily in research in all areas of renewables. I think maybe some of you have seen a commercial we've run lately, but we've developed a lithium-ion battery separator film that will enable the next generation of hybrid electric cars. We're working on research right now that would generate hydrogen onboard vehicles that would power fuel cells. That technology alone could reduce emissions by about 80% in vehicles today. And also through the Stanford program I mentioned earlier, working on various research projects that will actually help to commercialize some renewables such as solar and wind on a much wider scale. Because again, we firmly believe it's going to take an increase in all these sources to do so. We recently announced a $1 billion venture in some of our refineries to produce, to enhance production of low sulfur diesel. People talk about low sulfur fuel standards. Low sulfur diesel could meet that. And we've just made a $1 billion commitment in a few of our refineries to enhance the production of that product.
Let me just ask, before we run out of time on the main part of the program here, another concern driving a lot of the discussion of energy policy now is energy security. And where we get our energy from and dependence upon foreign companies. And in particular, a lot of the impetus for policies that are designed to move us away from reliance on oil are driven by how reliance on certain regimes and places, oil coming from places that may not like us, affects our foreign policy. How does ExxonMobil, if they get involved at all, how does ExxonMobil address those sorts of concerns in the policy debate over the future of oil?
I think a lot of people have different definitions of energy security. I'm not going to get into that, but fundamentally, the best way to ensure energy security is to ensure you have a diverse portfolio from diverse geographical locations. And we're in over 200 countries around the world right now, and continuing to look for more areas of production. There's no conceivable fuel today we're going to find here in the U.S. or frankly in another country that's going to meet all these challenges we have. In order to have one issue of energy security is maintaining coal. One issue or one facet of maintaining energy security, you could say, or one might say, is ensuring an affordable energy supply that can meet the demands in the future. And in order to do that, it's going to take mass investment. And we're engaged in that now. This is shy of any mandates from government. We feel an obligation to do so.
Okay. I know I promised to leave 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions. And I want to make sure we do that. I just want to note that I didn't expect to hear you both support development of renewable sources and to hear ExxonMobil support the carbon tax. I was surprised by that. So what I'd like to do now is, first of all, will you join me in thanking our guests for being here today? They came a long way, and we appreciate it. We've got about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So fire away. Yes, Nathan. Could you, when you ask your question, could you identify yourself, speak up for the microphones, and tell us to whom you're addressing your question?
My name is Nate Lockyer, and I'm a graduate student in the Energy and Earth Resources program at UT, at the Jackson School. And my question is for you, Mr. Pulliam. You mentioned one of the merits of the carbon tax is that you generate revenue and then be recycled in various ways. And we know that with the cap and trade program, there are permits that can either be auctioned or allocated freely. And when they're auctioned, they generate quite a bit of revenue, just as the carbon tax would. So my question is, does ExxonMobil have a specific stance on how they would like to see these permits allocated if the U.S. cap and trade system were to be set up?
Say it, I didn't hear the last part of that, I'm sorry.
Does your company have a stance on whether they prefer the permits to be allocated freely or auctioned?
Okay, yeah. Well, we're for 100% auction. We think that's the most efficient way to go. If it were a cap and trade, I want to say we prefer a carbon tax. It's just cleaner and simpler. And you step back. And if you step back from it, it really creates a less volatile price on carbon, and that both affects the consumer and us. I think when I talk about this, people think, well, you're talking about for ExxonMobil, but for consumers, when consumers make choices, if you were to go buy gasoline or some other form of energy that had a carbon tax on it, you would know what that tax was going to be on that product for years theoretically in advance. But to answer your question, sorry, it's Nate, right? Yeah, we are for 100% auction.
Which my understanding is in Europe they allocate the permits. In the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the United States in the Northeast, I believe they auction them. Is that correct?
Well,
you might know.
There's different, within Nate's question, there's a lot of different possibilities. There's some folks, we advocate for 100% auction because if you are going to choose a cap and trade and you are going to have the permits, we feel it's only fair to allocate them, auction them the same throughout the economy. Some people that advocate for cap and trade will advocate for giving free, as you well know probably, since you asked the question, Nate, advocate for giving free permits to some and charging others for permits. Of course, that creates all sorts of inefficiencies in the economy and also the distribution of energy.
Thank you. Did you want to chip in on that?
I think
Does that answer it?
We'd have members on both sides of the issue again, and I don't want to go there.
I should have said that.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Kerry King with the Center for International Energy and Environmental Policy here at UT in the Jackson School. So given the long time frames of energy investments that you both spoke of and people's desire to change as quickly as possible, or to cleaner energy resources, how do you view the expansion in research projects into things like FutureGen or things in vehicle technology in terms of if they're implemented too quickly and don't meet people's expectations, will there be a backlash against any particular technology versus waiting too long until you think it's ready to go? So essentially, how do you view the trade-off between pushing the limit of technology and expecting that some things aren't going to work out and that you're going to work through them as quickly as possible versus the backlash for that technology not meeting expectations of the public?
And your questions for both?
Either one, yes.
Jason, why don't you go first?
Particularly capture technology is a particular question for coal. But
Yeah, to the largest extent possible, I would say that's best solved by the market. And if you're a researcher and you've got something that you're trying to sell, if you can get investors to buy into it, then I would say your best bet is, can you convince someone that you actually know what you're talking about? Have you developed your technology well enough? And if so, then you're going to be able to have people buy in. That's what I would say is the best way to do it. Obviously, if something goes wrong, then yes, people will say, well, we shouldn't have done that. So that's why the research and development and then selling your ideas, being able to show that you've met the challenges, and if somebody has a question, you can say, yes, well, our research has already shown that, X, Y, and Z. So we understand that this is going to happen instead of this. But yeah, rushing to put something in place is going to cause problems, but then you always have that dilemma: how quickly and how extensively can you put something out before it's ready? It's probably a bad idea, but I think that's going to be the case with anything, whether it's energy or medical technology or anything. There's always that balancing act.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, rather than for me to just say, well, just let the markets handle it, I'm not going to say that. But I guess I don't understand the question totally, because I don't know what dynamic would rush a technology to market. I mean, there is a dynamic if it's mandated by the government, but they could mandate it. They could mandate a certain technology, but who is going to produce something that is not profitable at that time, not going to generate a return for themselves or their shareholders, or one that is not going to create the efficiencies that the policy was designed to create? So when both of those come together, that's when the technologies will come to market. It could be if there's a mandate, say next year, to bring a certain fuel or a certain engine type to the market, yet it is not ready to meet the efficiencies that it was intended to meet. It just won't be there. Or it could be there at a cost that a consumer could not afford, so therefore it would not be commercialized.
So we would see, so for example, in a lot of the last several energy bills and also in the stimulus package, I think there were provisions mandating that the government, for example, buy a certain number of alternative fuel vehicles for its fleet. And I suppose those are mandates that exist irrespective of the cost of those vehicles. That might be a situation in which people, these things come to market perhaps before they're market ready. Would that be the sort of scenario you were envisioning?
That's a good example. Another example would be the debate. You could pick a price, let's say if you were to pick a carbon tax, you could pick a price that is too low to induce capture technologies on coal plants, and you could pick a price that is sufficient that they would be induced to install capture. Or you could try to debate and try to pick the middle line where they wouldn't know what to do.
That's right.
So you could, by policy, induce technological change before you even think it's ready, because it changes the economics.
Well, let me on the carbon tax. And I want to be clear. Our point on that, and I don't know what the magic number is, mind you, but the number would need to impact behavior. Therefore, further to your point, would drive technology development. Any mechanism we choose should in and of itself drive technology development. And so that carbon tax, and I don't know what the number would be, but would need to be at that level. I agree with you. Having it too low is, and we're not advocating for that. We're not just ticking a box here. It would need to be at a level that would both change behavior and hopefully induce technological development.
And sometimes using policy to sort of push the market in that way it realizes benefits, but not for a very long time. So those of us in the room who are old enough to remember the Carter era policy package, remember that utilities were required to buy power at expensive rates from what they called then alternative energy projects, which meant a whole range of renewables and other things. And wind wasn't at all competitive back then, but because of that, that carrot that was dangled in front of wind, lots of innovation occurred that, 20 years later made wind much more cost competitive and made turbines much more environmentally friendly, and the blades move more slowly, and they don't kill as many birds, and they don't whir and make those weird noises and all that sort of thing. So that pushing the market in that way sometimes can have long-term benefits for the favored technology.
Right, and I don't want to leave this point. I think we need to be clear, because it's not usually part of this debate. I think it speaks directly to your question. Sometimes the expectations are just flat out unreasonable. People need to understand that the types of investments that are needed in some of these technologies, they will take years to develop. And some of these have been going on for years, and who knows how close they are. Some of them that I mentioned are very close, or already commercialized. But people need to have an understanding that because a policy is passed does not make it so, does not deliver the answer to the market. It just doesn't. We won't be able to afford it as consumers, or companies could not afford to bring it to market. I don't think that's a fine point. We need to, and it goes back to my point about having an intellectually honest debate about this, hopefully not driven by ideology, but driven by logic.
There's something else, that the unintended consequences of forcing those types of policies or the technologies in before they're ready is you can actually impact a lot of people. Like for utilities, it's a good example. If they're forced to do something, eventually the costs of that have to be paid by somebody. And typically that's going to be ratepayers. So what you do when you push these agendas or these policies, whatever you want to call them, you can impact a lot of people, and the people that are going to be paying for it a lot of the time can't afford it, especially in economic conditions like we have today. If people are teetering on the brink of foreclosures and you raise their electricity rates by 30, 40, 50%, what have you just done? You may have, sealed their doom, pushed them out of their house. So these are things that need to be discussed. So going back to what Greg said, you need the reasonable, logical policy discussion, and you need to hear from more than one side. So while the environmental goals are laudable and everybody wants them and you want to be efficient, you want to be clean, you also have to remember that at the end of the day, those technologies do cost money. So somebody's got to pay for them.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, it's just to continue the discussion. So I'm also from Jackson School and Center for International Energy and Environmental Policy. Continuing your discussion about the policy, I would like to ask you about the other aspect of the policy and the problems related to it. So do you foresee or already feel the problems, the negative effects of the uncoordinated policies? So what I mean is that, for instance, the different policies in different regions, like for instance the different carbon tax in different states or even in different countries, because you said you have the presence both in the United States and Europe, may for instance shift production, shift the consumption of electricity, which once again you will not reallocate the plants which are already there, but the more taxes make electricity in some regions more expensive, and therefore the production of cars or whatever can be shifted to other regions. Or another thing is, for instance, this can also damage the competitiveness of some goods on international markets, like something from US where you have, for instance, a higher taxes will become more expensive and will not be sold or by the demand in Europe or other Iran. And the third aspect of the same issue, this negative effect, is since you do not have a lot of coordination and policy, it can also reduce the efficiency of your search for better technologies. Like you will have some research and development for some technologies in the US and for others in Europe, whereas we can also cooperate on the issues and put more efforts in developing one particular technology which probably may be more efficient. So what is your view on the problem? Do you see a problem here, or you consider it, I don't know, so do you feel some kind of problem?
Tell me your name.
Svetlana.
Okay, I'll just take a shot at what I think the question was. Yes, there are fundamental problems in disparate policies, whether it's within the U.S. or whether you're talking about the disadvantages of having all these different policies. Inconsistency.
Inconsistency in policy.
Sure. Well, yeah, I simply said yes. There is a problem, and there's a problem in the U.S. where initially there are a lot of states taking action. There are regional initiatives. You mentioned RGGI. There's WCI, there's a Midwest regional initiative. A lot of these states, when they began taking these initiatives, it was really in response to a perceived or real lack of action from the administration, former administration. I think we all agree those signals have changed. There's going to be some action. I don't know when or what it's going to be, but we think there needs to be federal preemption. I'm using the United States as an example. There needs to be one policy for the United States. It's why I don't understand if there would be a federal, for instance, pick your state, but if the federal government would pass a policy, then the state would pass another one that would put further burden on a particular energy source or energy in general or particular technologies. I mean, that state is really damaging itself economically. But there needs to be a national policy.
But does the government realize this kind of problems?
You have to ask them. You have to ask them that question.
Well, let me just agree with Greg about why we have these state initiatives now. because there was a gap that the states thought they were filling.
No, it's also the question, so whether you already have filled these kind of problems arising from all this, and whether you complain about these problems to government or you do not really discuss it a lot?
No, we discuss it with governments around the world. Yeah, the solution is extremely complex. So we are in discussions with regulators and governments around the world constantly. And I mean, we feel it's important, and sometimes we're not invited, but we feel it's important we're part of the debate. If we're going to be one of the larger providers of energy in whatever form it is, you should have those people sitting at the table. You should.
And presumably the people that really feel the kind of pain your question suggests are their customers.
Consumers.
So then,
I mean, it's all together. The industry who have to bear more cost and think about reallocation and thinking how to manage their business, and
Right.
the customers
Absolutely.
will, of course, also feel this thing.
yeah.
Well, I could tell you, I mean, internally, I mean, we're constantly working on efficiencies. I mean, and that for us to be more efficient, and we're fairly successful at it.
No, I know about the diversity of Exxon
Yeah.
strategies and
Yeah.
approaches.
Did you have anything on this?
I can tell you that, again, we'll have members on both sides of the issue. I've heard some members say, definitely, we need national. You have to do everything federally because of the inefficiencies and the costs associated with it. And I've also heard other members say that that's not the way our system is set up, that a lot of the energy issues are regulated by states. And that's part of the system that we live in. So, again, I'm going to kind of beg off. We'll have people from our membership on both sides of the issues.
Just can I add one thing? To your point, I mean, China, I think by 2030 will have emissions equal to or greater than the EU and the U.S. combined. If they are not to join, or the U.S., if they are not to join, or in India, for instance, when we go to Copenhagen or in future meetings, not that will be decided there, but I mean, if they absolutely need to be part of the solution. It doesn't have much of an effect if one of the three who want India, China, or us join and the others don't. And that speaks to your uniformity. Right.
I'm sorry to have to cut off such an interesting discussion, but we're out of time. Thank you all for being here, and please let's thank our panelists again for being here.
Thanks.